We return now to the top story of the day: rebel forces seizing Damascus and ending Bashar al-Assad's rule in Syria. On the latest developments, reactions in the region, and what could come in Syria's closer future, we're talking with Ahmet Arda Şensoy, a political researcher in Nottingham, and Kamal Al-Shami, a political analyst based in Beirut. Ahmet, Kamal, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having us. Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. For starters, Ahmed, the reports Assad fled the country seem to be confirmed by Moscow, who now says Assad left the country and gave instructions on a peaceful transfer of power. How do you see the developing situation in Syria?
First of all, I think it was obvious for experts on Syrian civil war. When we closely monitoring the civil war recently, we saw that in a local sense, we sense that there are some clash between the regime and the opposition forces, especially on the west of the Aleppo and the Idlib. And we knew that the Assad regime was the weakest local actor in the war. But with Russian air power, with Iran-backed militias and the presence of Hezbollah had prevented to see that. After they are busy for other important geopolitical issues right now, they had to left Assad alone. So that's why we saw a sudden and quick dismantle for of the 54 years long Assad regime right now. And while armed opposition groups engaged in a long struggle, the regime refused to resolve the conflict through diplomacy and the peaceful means in so many times. And despite international pressures, including the regional actors, and in the recent one was the Ankara and Damascus process was the main issue in the last month. But we saw that the Bashar al-Assad did not give a positive response to President Erdogan, and that was unfortunate for him in that regard. But with his and his father's brutal regime for almost 55 years, I do not think that anyone will be sorry for him. I think that that's the main issue right now.
Kamal, in neighboring Lebanon, that is hosting a great many of refugees from Syria, there have been celebrations in the street. How do people react? What's happening on the ground? Also, were there any political reactions?
Well, Andy, uh, and even though Lebanon is a very small country, it's very ethnically and culturally diverse, and each and every single faction from Lebanon has been affected, whether for good or for worse, by the Syrian government, or the ex-Syrian government, should I say. I'd say the vast majority of Lebanese factions over here are rather celebratory. They're actually happy. They're optimistic of the future that awaits Lebanon, especially now since there are certain factions that might or may not be weakened inside of Lebanon. So the vast majority of factions, meaning from the Maronite Christian majority, from the Druze majority, and from the Sunni majority, are optimistic. However, there is the other faction, which is the Shiite majority of Lebanon, which is which has been rather quiet up until now. You can you can say one thing for sure is that no one is backing Al-Assad from the Lebanese side at all anymore. I think everyone has looked at it and everyone is seeing that it's a losing cause today, and they should start building relations with the newer government that will be formed. Even when certain proxies inside the country were expected to interfere, they refrained from interfering. You can see Russia building relations with the rebels, actually communicating with them for coordinations. So I think everyone in Lebanon and outside of Lebanon has understood there's no more speaking with the previous government. It's now time to speak with the newer government. It's now time to build relations with the new people in charge. Over here, we've been witnessing tons and tons of marches, of happy marches. Unfortunately, there have been some gunfire sounds in the distance. Lots of fireworks as well. Lots of motorcycle and vehicleized marches. For Syrian refugees and for people announcing their happiness. Political leaders of the many political factions in Lebanon have been rather vocal about it. Some have taunted the Assad regime, the government. Others have have simply commented on it, saying it's fallen. Now it's time for us to look for the future. But the general view on the case is that there's optimism to be looked at.
The Prime Minister and the rebel forces leader have given out messages that are promising for the near future, with one saying the government will cooperate with anyone who the Syrian people choose, and the other instructing fighters to protect public institutions. Ahmed, what do you make of that?
First of all, like the other guest said, we can see that the allies of the Assad regime has left to back him. So that, and in that way they try to have a channel with the new opposition groups, or maybe we can say formed will be formed a transition government. They try to have a role in there, or they try to have a clear diplomatic connections in there in order to gain in some influence in the newly formed regime or the government in the Damascus. So, by the way, we can say that in a from the Turkish side or the Turkish perspective, Turkey is closely monitoring the situation, not only for the Damascus and especially for the counterterrorism as well. And after President Erdogan's supportive comments on Friday, Turkish position came clear. Before that, it was very unclear, we can say that. And foreign minister today, he said Turkey was ready to help the transition process in Syria, and he warned against instability in the country. And especially he also mentioned that regional actors and others should be calm and cautious, and the region should not be driven into more instability. So he means that Turkey don't want any country to intervene Syria right now. Maybe you can say Israel, Gulf countries, Arab countries, Iran, or the U.S. So Turkey do not want them in the conflict environment right now, and keep it that the local way. So that's the Turkey's role and stance. We can say that right now.
Kamal, looking at things from Lebanon, would you say that there are vulnerabilities now that other forces or groups in the region might take advantage of?
Sorry, can you elaborate?
Yes, of course, other groups, other foreign countries, different backed groups. Do you see maybe a chance of an extremist group or a terrorist group making trouble in Syria now?
Yeah, I understand. Well, there's always the fear of that happening. Absolutely. Lots of people have been saying that we don't want what happened in Libya to happen again in Syria. But there's one thing to look at. What happened in Libya has already happened in Syria. There have been multiple factions, each faction having its own geographical slate of the Syrian map, ruling over it, maybe even making its own currencies in some cases. So the foreign factions have already been interfering. But I think what happened in Syria recently with HTS moving towards Aleppo and then etc., and then FSA moving towards Damascus, and then both of them meeting in Damascus, I think what happened was each side wasn't looking. Russia was very busy with Ukraine. Iran was very busy with what just happened on the Lebanese front from southern Lebanon. None of the Syrian government, the Assad government allies, could take care of what was going on. None of them could help him. So what happened by the rebels was that they took advantage of the case. Now, as for foreign intervention, I think what U.S. President-elect Donald Trump said recently on Twitter, I think, or X, was rather clear to everyone. They don't want to interfere. Maybe Western influence has already been interfering with it in a light way, but as for direct interference, I don't think that's going to happen from either Russia, China, or the US. When we're talking about the southern side of Israel, though, we can talk about Israel, and they have been rather vocal about it. They have been rather honest about it. We don't want problems at our border, at the Israeli border, that is. which is why we can expect military action, kind of creating like a buffer zone on the border, furthermore from the Golan Heights. Maybe even some can say that Israel want to move towards the Lebanese border with Syria to create a buffer zone from Hezbollah as well, and create a pressure plate on it. But that remains to be seen, really.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for speaking to AnewZ and sharing your insights.